Welcome back, everybody. Conrad's Corner. Thanks very much for tuning in again. Another exciting guest this time. We're really happy to have John with us, John Stewart. Here we are right now with John. John, thanks very much for joining today. Appreciate it. Tell a little bit about your history, your background, where you work, and then we'll get into why you're such an exciting guest today.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you having me here. I'm a podcast sort of newbie, so just bear with me as we continue to go through this conversation here, but thrilled to be invited, so thank you very much. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a commercial real estate broker. I've been in the industry for 18 years now. Time flies. I'm getting old. I actually started in the industry right out of my undergrad. So I went to the University of Guelph. I took their Bachelor of Commerce Housing and Real Estate Management program. Yeah. And that was sort of my foray into the industry. I didn't come from a real estate family, didn't have sort of connections in the industry before that. So that was really sort of the eye-opening experience for me and of what this sort of world of real estate and commercial real estate had to offer.
Good for you. I have to stop you right there and ask you, if you didn't have that family background and you didn't have a mentor that you're working with, did you know going into that? I mean, that's uncommon that somebody goes into university knowing that they want to take that and get into it without having a history.
Yeah, no, great point, and I'll tell you the story. So I knew I wanted to go to Guelph. Yeah. A lot of my friends were going to Guelph at the time. Both my parents had been to Guelph. My older sister was actually there, so I kind of wanted to go to Guelph. And I knew I wanted to be in business. Guelph had sort of specialization within their Bachelor of Commerce program, and I was kind of debating between a housing and real estate focus or a human resources focus. Had a conversation with my dad, who's a small business owner, a little bit of an entrepreneur, and he's like, I think you'll make more money if you go into real estate. So that was sort of the decision making.
That
was it for me. So I was like, okay, Dad, good advice. I'll pick real estate for my undergrad, and that's kind of how I ended up in the real estate portion of the business program.
Gotcha. That was the push instead of HR. It was like HR, let's try real estate.
Yeah, and
well, that's good. I mean, listen, they're infamous and well-known and a very reputable university, and they have a university co-op program, real estate program. We actually work with them on the co-op side, so well-known. They've been in the program for a long time.
And when I was in the program, it was actually very small. It wasn't nearly the size that it is today. There was like 13 people in my graduating class, and I know that it's grown substantially. And just looking at being part of the alumni and seeing all the events and things that they're putting on, they're fantastic. And yeah, I don't know what the graduating class numbers would look like now, but I got to think it's sort of plus or minus 100.
Yeah, good for you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the impetus between you getting into there, deciding it, and then going from there. Yeah. So you graduated and got into commercial real estate right away?
Yeah, so that's basically it. So I think I was in my third year, going into my fourth year, and I realized I wanted to be in real estate, and that's the time when I kind of determined that commercial brokerage was going to be the path that I wanted to at least start my career.
Did you know commercial right from the start? Was there any opportunity or point where you thought residential?
So for me, and just being in that program we did a lot of like financial analysis, worked on sort of like development cases, and sort of it was more geared towards larger, more commercial elements of real estate versus sort of one-off residential. So that program kind of gave me the insight to do more commercial type stuff. And for me, it was I like the more business nature of commercial. The more, even though there could be emotions involved, but the less emotional, right? Like I didn't want to have to, lose a deal because somebody didn't like the color of a bathroom or something like that. Yep. And preferred working with investors and large institutions and things of that nature, and helping them from an investment perspective. So that's what drew me towards commercial. And then when I was in my fourth year, I met with all of the large commercial brokerage companies, and sort of kind of made my decision in terms of where I wanted to start my career. Ended up starting at a brokerage called Colliers International at the time. I liked their sort of training program.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I liked the people who I would be working with. Yep. So that was really sort of why I ended up going to Colliers right out of my undergrad. And I actually started right in the selling capacity. So kind of worked out great. I graduated from university in the spring. They gave me the summertime to complete my license. Also did like the typical backpacking trip to Europe with a bunch of friends.
Very cool.
And then knew that my job was starting like after Labor Day in September. So I had my license. I started day one with a license. Hit the ground running and was sort of a junior agent working for some senior people.
Yeah, for sure. We probably know a lot of that timeline, those same
Yeah.
people. Were you out of the downtown office there, Colliers?
So I actually started in the north office.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up working under some senior brokers who were highly regarded, Jim McIntosh and Bill Pitt.
Yeah.
Bill's actually still one of my partners to this day. And when I first started, it was actually pretty good timing because Jim was in management for a long time. Bill was a very seasoned broker working on the industrial side, and they decided to come together and focus on investment sales, but specifically industrial investment sales.
Yeah.
So I joined them right when they were sort of starting a new business, even though they were longtime brokers and experienced. So I got to work with them on, growing and learning that investment business, industrial investment business. And so I was involved in sort of deals or calls or meetings or situations with transacting that maybe somebody that green wouldn't have been involved with at that time because we were all kind of learning the investment business together. So that sort of worked out well. And then ended up staying with them for 7 years. We actually grew our business over that period to being maybe the most dominant at selling income-producing industrial assets in the GTA. We had about a 30% market share.
Amazing.
But back then, that was when industrial cap rates were 8 and industrial rents were 5. So
I joke about it a lot with my former mentor, Goran, out of Cushman, and we joke about the time that we were doing deals in North York and in Etobicoke at the time, industrial, like $2.50.
Yeah,
and
totally.
that was like the height of the market. It was great, and we could never imagine seeing where it is as it is today.
Yeah, totally. Well, we actually just firmed up on a transaction last week.
Yeah.
It was Scarborough Industrial. Bill started his career leasing in Scarborough.
Yeah.
So he leased that asset for like you said, like $350 net. And now the rents are like $18 that are happening in
it's
that
crazy.
transaction.
It's like agents like Bill and Steve Connell and those ones that lived in that market in the Scarborough, they would never have imagined to see like 18, 20, 23, $25 net rents right now.
Yeah, it's wild, tremendous growth. So, if I had a crystal ball back then, I might have just stayed focusing on industrial investment because obviously it's had a great run. We still do a lot.
Is the bell of the ball right now as hot as anything right now?
Yeah, exactly. And we still do a lot of industrial, but we do other asset classes. So after my Colliers stint of 7 years with Jim and Bill as the industrial investment team.
And I'm curious, on that team, did you guys end up growing the team out to a sizable team, or did it stay small, just the three of you?
It was a relatively tight team.
Okay.
I think by the time I left, there was Jim, Bill, myself, and I think we had 2 or 3 support people working with us, analysts and marketing people. And that was actually a very tough decision for me to leave them because we had a great thing going on. But an opportunity arose that felt like I had to take at that point in time in my career. That's when I moved from Colliers to BMO Capital Markets, and I worked in the real estate investment banking group. And what was attractive to me at that stage of my career at that point in time, we've been doing a lot of industrial in the GTA, but that was going to give me an opportunity to work in other markets across the country, other asset classes, office, industrial, retail, development, land, et cetera.
Still on the investment side, though.
Still on the investment side.
But a national exposure.
But national exposure. So it was sort of a good opportunity for me to kind of learn and get better exposure for myself and work on larger transactions. And then also, Colliers, traditional brokerage company, learned a lot there. But being at an investment bank, working in an investment banking group, you get to see different aspects of the industry that you might not get at a traditional brokerage company.
Sure.
So they obviously do a lot with the public REITs, so sort of seeing how that side of the business works. A little bit quieter right now for the public REITs, not a lot of equity issuance. But back then, there was a lot of IPOs, equity issuance, M&A, so got to be involved in that and also see a little bit more how the lending side of the business works. So that was a really good learning experience for me, and happy to have had my time there. And then after BMO, I still stayed in touch with my friends at Colliers, Bill Pitt. Colliers was trying to create what they call the capital markets business at that point in time, focusing on sort of large national transactions. So at that point, I kind of left BMO.
Is there a threshold that was kind of the minimum for them? Are we talking $25, $50 million? Or?
So I don't think we had like a line in the sand threshold.
Right.
Generally speaking, it would be more like larger complex transactions.
Portfolios.
And generally speaking, it would be kind of client-centric. So we would work with usually institutional or public investors or large privates, deals on like groups that expect, a certain level of, financial underwriting and process, transaction execution capabilities, et cetera. So we're specialists at running a great process, financial underwriting, so we kind of work with those larger groups. So yeah, no real line in the sand, a little bit more client-driven, but tended to be larger transactions. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So then that was a good run there. We were there for about 5 years and gained some good market share. And I guess we started to draw the attention of, call it the competitive landscape, because we had Marcus and Millchap, IPA sort of reach out. And then my whole team, Scott, Bill, myself, and our support staff, moved from Colliers to Marcus and Millchap IPA 3.5 years ago, and we sort of haven't looked back. And we're still doing, larger transactions, working with institutional, public, and large private investors. I'm still working in multiple markets and still working on, multiple asset classes, office, industrial, retail, and development land.
Yep.
And, it's always a hard decision when you move companies, particularly for us, because it was our whole team. But what we have found is our clients stuck with us, our clients supported us. Ultimately, and you probably see this with your brokers too,
Yep.
Oftentimes, the clients want to work with the people that they know have the track record, the experience, and the capabilities.
Yeah.
So luckily our clients were following us, and we've been able to gain more market share since we moved.
Amazing. Congrats on that. That's
Thanks.
quite the story. An impressive career
sorry,
so far. I love it.
Long-winded.
No. It's great. I was running through a couple of things in my head at the time, thinking about that. You mentioning going from Colliers, then over to the bank, then
Yeah.
I'm running, and we're probably the same ilk in terms of generation. That sounds like it might have been around the 2008 banking crisis time. Is that right?
It would have been slightly after that. I forget
Okay.
the exact years I was at BMO, but I feel like it was like 2010 to 2013-ish.
Okay, so they'd still kind of come out that.
I'd have to check my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah,
to
really,
remember
let's pull it up.
exactly, but yeah.
So they probably at that point were coming out of it, and
Yeah.
the trough at the bottom had already passed, and that's when you were making the move. They knew they wanted to grow the business.
Yeah.
That was probably the fortuitous timing to making that happen.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, because obviously where we are these days in terms of what's been going on since the pandemic, 4 years ago, coming out of it, interest rates, labor, construction costs. It mimics a little bit about what you might have seen at that time in the 2008.
Yeah, for sure. There were challenges back then. Financing wasn't readily available. The public markets were not, firing on all cylinders for real estate companies. So we have a lot of those challenges right now. Although I find this time it's a little bit more prolonged. I feel like back then it was a bit of like a break in action, nothing happens for a period of time, and then we kind of restarted. Whereas now I feel like it's just a little bit more prolonged. We haven't seen a complete break in action, but transaction volume is down, and deals are more challenging. We're still actively transacting, but it's not equal, right? Certain asset classes, certain markets are performing dramatically better than others, and with higher interest rates, investors generally have higher return requirements across the board. So we have seen pretty significant changes in valuation over the last 18 to 24 months, which sometimes can be very difficult when you're talking with selling groups who have, last year's pricing in mind, and or appraisals and book values that are maybe not in line with market. So,
well, I mean, listen, I have this conversation on almost a daily basis, at least a weekly basis. You tell me if you're hearing the same thing. We talk a lot about right now where we are and where we've been coming out of things, and the cyclical nature of it. The delta between the sellers and the buyers right now. The price discovery, the price discrepancy, whatever you want to call it, in terms of sellers, as you said, having that valuation that they previously had and thinking that they're sitting on a gold mine. Buyers coming into it thinking that, well, it's a buyer's market. Clearly it's a buyer's market, and there's that. So we talk a lot about right now our brokers being the catalyst and really helping facilitate that deal right now, because it's less about pricing these days and more about the objectives of the two parties. Are you hearing that and finding that right now? Yeah, for sure. There's definitely that spread between buyer and seller expectations. And we're finding there's less, the buying community has shifted and changed. Over the last few years, we would have had a lot more, call it institutional type buyers. And if you go back even pre-COVID, there was public investors who were buying as well. But over the last several years, it's really sort of focused more on private capital, private buyers.
When interest rates were a little bit lower, it was great for them. But now that interest rates are a little bit higher, they can't afford to pay as much. But private capital has continued to sort of be the most active buying group.
Yeah.
So what we've found is our average deal size has decreased a little bit over the last little while. We probably were transacting, average deals sort of in the $60-70 million range, but now it's more like 20 to 30.
Oh, wow.
Because that's where there's liquidity.
Yeah.
And that's where there's buyer depth.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is it's easier to sell, and pricing is held up better for transactions in that size range than larger. It's funny though, if you get really large, like over 500 million to $1 billion,
okay,
then there's more groups again, because you start to get foreign capital who looks at Canada and finds it very attractive, kind of coming into the market. So there's a little bit of a gap.
It's interesting. So you got the pendulum has to go almost all the way across.
Yeah.
The middle is a little bit difficult right now.
The middle's a little, not to say that there's not liquidity, because there is liquidity, particularly for higher quality assets in the middle, but
sure,
medium and smaller deals are easier to sell. Mega deals are easier to sell. It's just in that middle where it's a little bit more challenging. Yeah.
Where would be the largest portion of the pie right now? The smaller stuff?
Yeah. If you look at where the deals are getting done, it would be probably transactions, like I said, kind of plus or minus 30 million.
Yep.
That appeal to a wide buyer pool, mostly privates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're seeing volume these days. Yeah.
Okay, for the balance of the year, I mean, we're halfway through 24 right now. Do you think that's going to continue? I mean, obviously, we've finally seen our first cut.
Yep.
Anticipation is that there's probably some more cuts to come, and then we're going to level off near the end of the year.
Yeah.
Any major changes, or do you think it'll stay status quo?
Well, I think I'm optimistic that the Bank of Canada's interest rate announcement will start to be a bit of a catalyst, so we might start to see more groups kind of come back into the mix. I'm also hopeful that it'll give certain sellers maybe a little bit more confidence to go to the market, because they were kind of looking for a catalyst.
Yeah.
And then I think we got to answer that question. I think you got to get a little bit more granular, kind of in asset class specifics, right? So I think industrial will continue to sell well,
Mm-hmm.
because of some of the things we were talking about earlier. Rental rate growth, albeit we're starting to see that rental rate growth taper and slow.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of new development in that sector as well. And office, on the other hand, has been challenged and continues to be challenged. And we've been selling office, but office is really, you got kind of two camps right now. You've got higher quality, stabilized assets that are well located, probably newer generation, offer a lot of good tenant amenities, and maybe most importantly, have a very solid income profile with a weighted average lease term of at least 5 years or longer. That product sells well, still sells sort of on a cap rate basis. And then you have what we call sort of more value add transactions, and those would be, they don't necessarily have to be lower quality, but they don't have an income profile that is as attractive. And right now, buyers are not paying for, call it future leasing. So if you've got buildings that have vacancy, groups are almost buying those more on like a price per pound basis versus then on an income yield basis. So we're seeing deals that maybe we're trading around, I'm talking mostly about suburban, around $300 a foot, trading more like plus or minus $150 a foot.
Really?
In the suburban market. So there is liquidity in both sides, but that market's definitely got a little bit more challenges to it versus the industrial sector. And then retail has come back. It's now one of the most highly sought after asset classes, which actually gives me hope for office in the future, because I can remember when retail was, the bad word and there was no liquidity for retail. But now in certain situations, I would say retail, particularly if it's good grocery anchored or service oriented, would maybe be the top of the list in terms of what investors are looking to buy right now, above industrial and above retail.
That's interesting, and not many people know that. We did have the foresight at one point on the show. We had John Crombie on.
Yeah.
And John, spoke about it and said, listen, for those that want to buck the trend and the crowd goes this way and you're willing to look this way on the investment side, there will be opportunities. Now is the time. And as it turns out, a year and a bit later, John was right. You know, John was saying at the time that retail is going to be less volatile than office, a little bit more stability. We tend to like bricks and mortar, good grocery anchored, whether you're the First Caps or whoever you might be, they're going to come out of it stronger.
Yeah. So certain people watching this might think I'm biased by saying I think now's a great time to buy office, because we do have a lot of office listings that we're selling, but I truly believe that there is dislocation, and I'm not saying every asset, but if you can buy those best quality assets with a secure income profile, I think we could look back in 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it is, and those will look like, fantastic transactions.
So those that are well positioned, that have the appetite to be able to stomach a little bit of difficulty the next little while,
Yep.
or facilitate a deal.
I think they'll be rewarded, but I mean, it's now more than ever in that asset class. It takes a lot of, very specific underwriting, because you might have an asset on opposite sides of a street, might look the same to a layperson driving by, but those income characteristics could have very dramatic, implications for value and pricing.
So specifically the meat and potatoes, the bones of what's going on inside the walls.
And the rent roll.
And the rent roll,
the income profile.
Interesting. Well, you know what? I mean, that makes sense. And you touched on suburban versus urban.
Yep.
And if we've been following our colleagues at CoStar, our colleagues at Altus, the people projecting it, that is something that I think they've been pointing out, that it's very different characteristics.
Very different characteristics.
If you're looking at A class, B class, C class,
Totally.
obviously in any situation that'll matter, but also urban versus suburban. Did you see any major change coming out of when we had Carl Gomez and Ray Wong on the show? They talked about, well, work from home is still prevalent. It's hanging on a lot longer than we thought it would. So people are tending to move their offices to the suburbs. Urban is still quiet, not picking up. On the market capital update recently from Carl Gomez, they're saying, well, now it's starting to get busier. We're seeing the Path busier, we're seeing downtown offices busy. Ray talks about Tuesday to Thursday, I can't get a reservation anymore. So is that still having an effect at all, work from home, and the, I want to call it the ghost town effect that we were seeing in the Path?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't make it easier to sell office buildings in that type of environment, but we are seeing, walking around, my office is downtown Toronto, so the Tuesday to Thursday thing is real. It's super busy, so that certainly helps. We haven't seen a lot of downtown Toronto office transactions as of yet, and those tend to be larger deals than suburban deals.
Yeah.
And we talked about before about that being sort of the gap in the middle in terms of buyers. So if anything, I think maybe we've seen a little bit more tailwinds behind suburban, and with that work from home thing, there is a little bit more, and traffic, we were talking about traffic, like it's a pretty big, and everything that's happening on the Gardner, pretty terrible for a lot of people to have an hour and a half commute in each direction to get downtown. So there has been more leasing velocity in the suburbs, which might attract certain groups to think that now is a better time to be buying in the burbs than downtown. But that being said, if you could buy a tremendous asset in downtown Toronto, at a yield 200 basis points above where you might have been able to buy it 3 years ago, and I'm a huge believer, we're huge believers in flight to quality, so still think that the best buildings downtown are going to continue to be the best buildings, and if you can get something like that at 200 basis point spread or more over what you could have, over the long term, think that could be a great deal.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I have a couple questions based off that. Flight to quality, we hear about that a lot. That's really the way it is these days. So for your clients, and without giving away any secret sauce or the special rapport that you have with your clients, you mentioned you have a bunch of office leasing listings right now. What are your clients saying to you when they come to you right now about this is why we're selling, or the ones that are looking to buy, why are they looking to buy? Like, what are you hearing in terms of what the market's saying?
Yeah, on the sales side, there's always reasons for people to be vendors, right? And it depends on the profile of the group. Most of the vendors we're seeing in office right now, it's not that they're forced, but most of the vendors tend to be larger institutional type groups who, for various reasons, have made this strategic decision that this is not an asset, not necessarily asset class, but this is not an asset that we want to hold long term. So we want to sell it. We can redeploy that capital in a higher yielding environment into something that's more in line with our strategy on a long term basis, and have a new entry point at a higher yield than they otherwise could have. So that's where most of the selling is coming from in the office side.
Repositioning their portfolio.
Repositioning, yeah, exactly.
So not knee-jerk reactions, fire wagon sales. Nobody right now is really in a situation like that, although I will get you to comment briefly on What's going on with all the power of sales, and what's going on with all the receiverships these days?
So we're seeing the powership and the receiverships that we're seeing tend to be more on the development land side of the equation. We have seen significantly less of them on the income producing side, so we're not really seeing a lot of underperforming office buildings or industrial buildings, not that there are many underperforming industrial buildings, where groups are being forced to sell. Aware of one situation where that's happened and tracking a few other where that's upcoming. So largely the distress selling in that regard has been focused on development land and primarily residential development land. So a lot of these sites were some of these sites were acquired and development plans were put in place when land values were quite a bit higher and construction costs were quite a bit lower. And some of these groups were kind of caught, and it's clearly not a very good environment to be selling residential condo units on a pre-construction basis. That buyer pool has more or less evaporated for obvious reasons. So that's really where the pain is being felt and where we're seeing most of the challenges in that regard.
Okay. We were down in New York for the global conference recently, and there was some talk from the States and a concern from them about their commercial loans. Are you hearing, as we look at some of the cycles coming up and some of the people renewing, are you hearing any talk at all about the consumer loans, commercial loans?
It's the Canadian market and the U.S. market diverge quite a bit from a financing perspective. Just look at our large Canadian banks, right? So they're dominant. They do most of the lending. They're very well capitalized. The U.S., you have a lot of situations where it's smaller, more regional banks, right? And they just do not have the scale or the financial resources to absorb, significant loan losses. And so I think the Canadian market is positioned better than the U.S. market in that regard. And we always talk about the differences between Canada and the U.S. A lot of our market overview presentations talking with vendors. It's a different mentality. Canadians, we always say, like, our pendulum in Canada, doesn't swing that far. Like, when things are good, they're good. When things are bad, they're bad. But the U.S., they have bigger swings, right? So if there's a big development cycle in the U.S. from an industrial perspective, you might see a market like Dallas, that's roughly 300 million square feet of inventory, building like 60 million square feet. Whereas the GTA were, 900 million square feet of inventory. And I think the busiest year we've ever had for new construction is something like 15 million square feet. So we don't put ourselves in those types of situations, generally speaking, so we're not overbuilding.
That's the Canadian cautiousness, right?
Exactly.
It's like, whoa.
We're not overbuilding, and we're backed by generally stronger, more sophisticated lenders, so we're not going to have the level of distress in the commercial side that you might see in the U.S., right? So it's just different.
Gotcha. In terms of the distress, we talked about that. You mentioned a little bit about the land side. Are you guys prominent in that as well?
Yeah, well, there haven't been a ton of development land sales over the last little while, so nobody's really prominent in them right now. But we have done quite a bit of large land sales over the years. From an industrial perspective, before we started to see interest rates increase, we did a couple of very large industrial development land deals in the GTA. One we sold sort of in Markham to large institutional group GWL Realty Advisors for $120 million right before interest rates started to increase. And we did another large deal right abutting the airport in Mississauga that we sold to Quadreal for about $115 million. So we are active in that space. And from a residential development land site, condo site, we do those transactions as well. But that market's been quiet. We've been in the market with some of those types of projects, and we actually have a pipeline of more of those projects. But we're kind of talking to our sellers and kind of just watching the market and saying maybe now's not the moment to go to market with those unless you have to. So we have a few things sort of on the sidelines that we're going to bring to the market when the time is right. Hopefully later this year.
Oh, I was just going to say, the timing is right. When do you foresee that being this year, or are we talking into next year?
Hopefully later this year.
Fingers crossed?
Yeah. And as brokers, we always like to sell stuff. So
yeah, well, listen.
The sooner the better.
Generally speaking, yeah. We tend to be a little bit agnostic here. You know, we bring on everybody from every brokerage, but I do like to give a little bit of insight for the brokerage that you work with. Talk a little bit about why you're there and what you love about them.
Yeah, so Marcus and Millichap, relatively newer from a Canadian context. I think they've been in this market for 6 or 7, maybe 8 years, something along those lines. Very big in the US.
Yes.
Their niche would be, historically call it private capital investment sales. So Marcus and Millichap's core business, particularly in the US, is call it like $1 to $20 million of transaction size. And they wanted to grow in Canada. We sit in what they call their IPA division, Institutional Property Advisors, which, because they were so dominant in the $1 to $20 million space, they wanted to find a way to compete in the larger transaction space, so they kind of created this new division.
So explain that and define that a little bit for people that may not be familiar with IPA.
Yeah, so IPA, so the way we generally describe it, and I'm assuming your audience is a little bit familiar with the real estate market and commercial brokerage market, so if I'm getting too specific, I could dumb it down a little bit further, but try and make the comparison like the other large brokerage companies like a JLL or a CBRE. They have what they call their capital markets divisions, which usually tend to focus on, call it the larger institutional sales. They'll also have other services like mortgage brokerage and potentially raising equity. So IPA, for lack of a better description, would be the capital markets division of Marcus and Millichap.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and you've been doing that from day one there?
Yeah, we've been doing that from day one there, yeah. And that's, remember, my team moved from Colliers to IPA, so we were the capital markets team at Colliers, and now we're the IPA team at Marcus and Millichap. And,
okay.
Yeah.
So I often ask this question to a lot of the guests. Santa comes along and the $5 million question, or whatever it might be, 50 million, 20 million, Santa drops a bag of money in John's lap. Merry Christmas, everybody's happy. Where would you be putting that money in the balance of 2024 heading into 2025?
So I talked a little bit earlier about best-in-class office and how pricing is so dislocated there. I would be buying some awesome office buildings at yields that are really, really, really high. That's what I would be doing. I think there's a huge opportunity to do that, right? The other option is, try and buy small bay industrial along with everybody else.
Yeah, get in line.
And get in line, right? Or grocery anchored retail along with everybody else.
Get in line.
Get in line. Yeah. So I have conviction on that thesis, so that's what I would do.
Good to know. Well, we revisit this and see in a year when Santa drops that money.
So where's the money?
Yeah, where's the money? Eh? So that's great. Thank you so much. Really insightful. Love it. But let's chat a little bit about the other aspect of why I have you on. So talk to us a little bit about NAIOP.
NAIOP, yeah. So I am the president of the Greater Toronto NAIOP Association in 2024. It's a great honor. I'm thrilled to be in that role. I've been involved in NAIOP for basically since I got in the industry, and I found it's a great organization, and it's like many things in life, kind of the more you put into it, the more you get out. So I've been very involved in volunteering, trying to get on committees, getting on the board and trying to help in those various capacities. NAIOP is a commercial real estate association.
Stands for National Association.
So it's interesting that you say that. It used to stand for something, but now it doesn't stand for anything.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because I just got an email recently and there was a survey and they were asking about the name, and I was going to grill you a little bit on that.
Yeah, they're in the process of rebranding, and I think what's happened is
for those that don't know, it was National Association of
Industrial and Office
Practitioners, or whatever
exactly.
it might be. Okay.
That's the history, but what's happened is over time, owners and service providers of industrial and office have also branched out into other asset classes.
Sure.
So now we're not distinguishing based on asset classes. We're a commercial real estate association, commercial real estate development association.
Yep.
So we kind of cover the gambit from that perspective.
And by the way, I don't know if this was your initiative or something that's been going on for a long time, but I love it. I actually think it's great.
I unfortunately can't take the credit for that one. It's NAIOP from a corporate perspective.
Sure.
So beyond the Toronto chapter,
Yep.
has sort of been
The
leading that
institute,
charge.
if you will. Or,
Yeah, exactly. And NAIOP is very large in North America, lots of chapters in the US and in Canada. The Greater Toronto chapter is actually the second or third largest chapter in all of NAIOP. We've got about 1,300 members. So we've got a pretty big voice within NAIOP.
Yeah, definitely.
And our often chapters, other smaller chapters in other markets in the US or Canada, will often look to Toronto to see what we're doing and try and learn best practices, things of that nature.
Yep.
But our membership and our sponsors tend to be, really revolves around the large owners and developers of commercial real estate, largely institutional, some publics, and large privates, and then everybody who sort of supports them. So you have the various service providers, all the brokerages have involvement, some of the law firms, various service providers. So it's really sort of supposed to be a reflection of the commercial real estate industry in the markets where we sit. And Toronto is obviously a very big market for now.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking of some of the other organizations. Unlike some of those, is there a threshold or a minimum requirement for people to enter NAIOP?
No, so we're open for new members.
Okay.
Like I said, we're kind of number 2, number 3. Maybe we'll be number 1 one day. So we encourage more people to sort of join NAIOP. And really, our programming and what we do revolves around kind of 3 main pillars. We do lots of stuff, but we can kind of categorize it in these 3 main pillars, which would be, I'll start with my favorite, which is more networking.
Yep.
So it's a very good opportunity to meet people, whether they're your peers, whether they're your clients, whether they're other service providers. Great opportunity to kind of get out there, meet people, grow your relationships, build your business for yourself and for your company. So a lot of events around networking, and our Rex Awards that are upcoming would be a great example of that. Beyond networking, we also do education. So we offer specific courses for people to kind of learn, whether it's financial analysis, lease analysis, development pro forma, et cetera. Very specific educational courses. We actually have what we call a CREST certification. So if you take all of the courses in a given period of time, you get a CREST development certification. And then also, big part of our programming, we have our marquee breakfast events where we have seasoned people in the industry talking about what's happening in the market. So that would be sort of another component of education. And then the final piece is advocacy. And the US chapters were sort of leading the charge in this regard. Canada has really made sort of a big push over the last couple of years, and the GTA would sort of be leading that. So we have a government relations committee that works with various levels of government, City of Toronto, Province of Ontario, and now even federally in combination with some of our other chapters across the country to advocate for our industry. So one of the things we've been working on recently with the City of Toronto is just educating councillors on office, changes in office valuation, where vacancy rates are, because we're in the middle of a housing crisis. So we're trying to let them see that maybe we shouldn't have to replace existing office when we're building a residential development project. It makes more sense just to build all res. So that's an example of something that we've been actively advocating for with the City of Toronto for our members and sponsors.
That's great. I mean, 3 really good pillars. Sounds like you guys are doing a lot of work. Congrats. Sounds like an enormous amount of work. So
well,
congratulations.
We've got a great board. There's 20 people. And NAIOP has been very well led for years. So I'm kind of just here as a guardian for a period of time.
A figurehead for a little bit.
Trying not to mess it up and keep it going in the right direction.
Just don't break it.
Exactly.
You break it, you buy it.
Exactly.
No, that's amazing. Congrats. And certainly, I don't know if there's been any discussions about it, but and we talk about this a lot on the show, the topic du jour is renovations and retrofits, office, residential. Are you guys having any conversations at the federal or provincial level about transforming vacant office into residential? Because that seems to be something that we get asked about all the time.
Yeah, so I think, we are definitely, and that what I was just mentioning, our conversations with the City of Toronto is part of that. We've been sharing that with federal stakeholders as well. One of the things we find with office conversions is it's not always changing a building from office to residential, that can only happen in very few circumstances when the physical structure of the building is just right, when the specs kind of line up. What's more likely is that old office building that's no longer functional should be torn down and a brand new, highly functional residential building should be built in its place. Yeah, so there are some conversations happening in that regard, and our GR committee is probably more versed in it than I am, and probably better to speak to if we want to go deep down that path.
No, it's good to know, and I do agree with you. That tends to be the path of least resistance, and some of the projects we've seen where they've gone down that have been, some of them successful. I'm thinking of some in Calgary, some in Edmonton, but by and large, you end up finding a little bit of surprise under the rug. Yeah,
for sure. And Calgary very much has been leading the charge in that regard, and just the city of Calgary is obviously giving owners incentives to convert. You know, Toronto is very much lagging in that regard, but early days.
Yeah, early days. You mentioned some of the networking events. What kind of events are you guys doing?
Yeah, so the Rex Awards is the big one.
That's the one. That's dear to my heart.
Yeah, and that's next week.
That's dear to my heart. 2015 award recipient.
There you go.
Office Deal of the Year.
Office Deal of the Year.
So
it's a big accomplishment to win a Rex Award. So congratulations.
Well, you know, a lot of the credit goes to the senior broker on the other side that was working with me. We worked with Slate, a great group, obviously. On the office side, we had a massive office renewal. It was great, but I will tell you this: everybody at NAIOP, the Rex Awards, was first class.
Yeah,
it really was. This was back when it was in April. It was a phenomenal reception, great dinner. Everybody in the industry, good to get out there, see people that you might not have seen in a number of years. A really first class production.
Yeah, we always joke it's kind of like the real estate Oscars. Yeah, and it's always really well attended. The organizing committee always does a fantastic job. So yeah, really excited for it next week.
Yeah, no, it's great. The real estate Oscars. You could say that. I thought you were going to say maybe the real estate reality show or something like that. Selling Sunday. It's a great thing. It really is.
We've also got our development challenge upcoming, which is focused for developing leaders in the industry. So that would be people sort of 35 and younger. Great opportunity to showcase their abilities there.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of programming. We just finished our golf day.
Well, that is great because, you know, I don't want to gloss over that because that is important. A lot of the things we hear, and you and I, you know, specifically, and you coming right out of university, that was back in the day. It's an old boys network, you know, certainly it's become more prevalent in terms of the sexes, men, women, everybody's accepted. The old boys club has probably not been as prevalent as it once was, but for the younger, newer agents, you try and have some events that make them feel welcome as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I find when you go to our events, it is a pretty big cross section of people from the industry. It is very diverse.
Yep.
Like even just looking at our board of directors, I think we've got, you know, a very big mix of people, male, female, various stakeholders in the industry, things of that nature. So we are really cognizant of trying to reflect the overall industry, and I think we're doing a pretty good job there. We've actually just made a few changes this year, and like I said, NAIOP's been exceptionally well run over the years, and we're always just trying to make sort of tweaks around the edges in order to make it better. So one of the things we've done is we've created a new board position for DE&I, and which is a big push from NAIOP corporate. So we're going to be implementing some new programs and strategies on a go-forward basis from that perspective, and we're excited. We're excited what that could look like in the future.
Yeah, amazing, very important. That's very forward-thinking of you guys. I'm glad that you're on top of that. We get questions about that all the time. Certainly, with our network being what it is of 670 plus brokers across the country, it's something that we hear a lot about, and making sure that everybody feels welcome. That's amazing. Congrats. Really happy to hear that. NAIOP, for those that aren't familiar, it's a yearly membership. How does it work?
Yeah, so it's generally a yearly membership. There's lots of different categories. If you go on our website, you can find it out. But open for individuals to join. Also open and have opportunities for corporate sponsors.
Yep.
So yeah, we're always looking for new members, and it's, like I said, it's been one of the best things in my career for my personal development. And I definitely think it's one of those things. The more you put in, the more you can get out. So I would definitely encourage, you know, all of your employees and everybody watching the podcast to go to the NAIOP website and learn a little bit more.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to give it a big push. We'll make sure that we put the link in there and try and push everybody to go check it out and join.
Good.
Congrats on that. A little bit about you, little bit about your personal side. What do you do for fun? What do you like to do in your downtime? Do you have any downtime? Sounds like you're a pretty busy guy, but if you do get some downtime, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, it's generally been pretty busy. I know you know my wife Laura. She works at Royal LePage as well.
Yeah, we love Laura. Laura's phenomenal. Laura's got a great, Laura's actually one of the main reasons why we started this. She helped kick off Conrad's Corner, her and her partner Jazz. We love them both over at Royal LePage Signature.
Yeah.
She's got the Laura show now, which is phenomenal as well, so she's big into this.
Yeah, so my wife is like the podcast queen, and this is my first time ever, so she's probably going to look at this and laugh. But yeah, spent a lot of time with my wife. We kind of grew up skiing and ski racing, so we like to do that. In the winter time, we members at a little club up north called Mansfield Ski Club.
Yep.
Summertime, love going up to the cottage, kind of hanging out up there and doing all that type of good stuff. And then I'm trying to get more into golf. I'm not a great golfer, but I've been taking lessons and I'm seeing some improvements in my game.
So
hopefully when I have time, I can do a little bit more golf this summer.
Yeah, no, listen, golf is it's not a job, it's a career. You just say, forget about it. I'm going to invest all my time in that.
Yeah, glutton for punishment, just like real estate brokerage. So it's all good.
Exact same thing, isn't it? It really is. That's the way it is. Well, congrats on that. That's amazing. Good luck with the golf game. I saw you guys did a little bit of traveling recently.
Yeah, we do like traveling. We were actually just in Spain, and
looked wonderful.
Yeah, my wife, she does a lot of social media content creation. So if you follow her, you probably saw everything that we did in Spain. But we had a great trip there. And hopefully we can get another good trip or two in the books before the end of the year.
Amazing. And you've got a little dog?
We have a 9-year-old Labrador Retriever, Rudy.
Yeah, Rudy.
He's our boy, and love hanging out with him. Laura also pumps out the content on Rudy.
She does. Yeah.
I think he has an Instagram page. I don't know how active it is anymore, but you could look at Rudy, check Rudy out online.
That's amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. This has been beyond insightful. Thank you for all the knowledge on the capital markets. Thank you for all the knowledge on IPA, on Marcus Millichap, on NAIOP, obviously. We're going to do a big push, and it's been phenomenal having you on.
Perfect. If anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to me directly about NAIOP. More than happy to talk to you, and hopefully get you to join us.
That's great. We're going to connect everybody with you. Make sure your socials are put in there, the NAIOP socials in there.
Perfect.
As always, everybody, thank you very much for joining another show. Like, subscribe, watch, follow, and until next time, and our next guest, thanks very much to John Stewart.
All right. Thank you very much.